Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I am delighted on this episode to be talking with comics creator Will Pfeifer. Will, thank you for jumping in, joining, and talking with me for a few minutes.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy you said yes. Um, I'll start by mentioning a couple of titles that you've worked on. Just some, lesser known characters like I don't know, Aquaman, Batman, Legend of the Dark Knight, just a few of those kind of things, as well as Blood of the Demon, a rather sizable run on Catwoman as
hmm
well. So a nice amount of work for DC Comics. Um, that's primarily what I know you for, but we can also circle around and talk about maybe some things that aren't on that list. So I'm curious how you decided comics were the place that you wanted to create.
Probably like most people you talk to, I've been reading comics since I was a little kid. I talk about the time when I was very young. I had to be, I don't know, 5 or 6 or so, and my mom bought me a comic book to read on a trip to grandma's, and it happened to be Spider-Man one, I think 122. It's the one where the Green Goblin dies.
Hmm.
Gwen Stacy has just died, and Harry Osborn is like, I don't know if it's acid or PCP, but he's like crazy. So it's the perfect comic, in other words, for a small child to be reading, but
Absolutely,
it
absolutely.
locked me in. So yeah, I've been reading him ever since. And when I was in college, I did a lot of small press comics. I had my own little comic called Violent Man and a couple others, and I would print them up, sell them through the mail, sell them at comic book shows and this and that. And I made some friends at college who actually did comic books, including Jill Thompson, who was briefly living in Kent, Ohio at the time, which is where I went to
Hmm.
college. And when, excuse me, when she came back out to Chicago and I moved out to Rockford, Illinois when I started my working career, we bounced some ideas together, and I told her about this idea I had for a crazy dark comedy set in a college. And a couple years later, because the wait was long, but Vertigo published Finals, and that was my first comic book work, first professional comic book work.
Nice, nice. And Vertigo has published such interesting work. What a way to start the career
Oh
as
yeah, I
well.
was proud to be part of that legacy, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. As far as your creative process, what is that like as you're looking for inspiration, as you're creating in these, as I mentioned, well-established worlds as well as other worlds?
Um, excuse me. I think usually like I'll use Catwoman as example, sort of, because that's what I wrote the longest, and I had a great time working on that book. I just, like everyone, I try to think of stories I want to read, but I
Hmm.
also think like on a level, okay, you're Catwoman, you live in Gotham City. What's it like? What is day-to-day life like? And then what kind of crazy things can happen that, because you can't just have people sit around and do their day-to-day life all day long, because you need some action, you need some excitement, you need some twists and turns and everything. So, but I
Hmm.
always try and keep it a little bit grounded, which can be tricky, when we did Aquaman in San Diego plunged into the ocean. But really, I was
Hmm.
trying to think
Hmm.
like, what would happen? What if assuming this happened, what would it be like? And so I always find that a lot of fun to just bring a little, I don't want to say realism, but a little level of what's the verisimilitude? Isn't that the word?
That's a great
Yeah,
word. I
that
love
is a
that.
great word.
Yeah.
I remember reading somewhere that when they were filming Superman, the movie, the Christopher Reeve version, I
Hmm.
think Dick Donner, the director, had that word like on a wall in the meeting room, like because we know we're telling a story about an alien with superpowers, but
Yes.
let's try and be realistic, or at least somewhat grounded.
Yeah.
So
The reflection of life. And you are the first
exactly.
person on the podcast to use that word, I do believe. So that's
And I
great.
confess, I never quite knew what I know generically what it meant. I didn't know it meant that. So
I
I've
think
learned
that's something like that.
I've learned something.
That's why people stop by, so they can hear creators talk and
That's
learn the things.
exactly it.
Yeah,
Learn
yeah.
to expand your vocabulary.
Well, that speaks so well to what works well in comics too, because you have these very elevated stories. You have characters that theoretically couldn't exist, but then there's got to be some piece there that we hold on to, so it's not just completely removed from reality at all.
Exactly. I mean, I think, in a weird way, that's why especially sort of the wave one of, or whatever. However, up until Infinity War, the Marvel Universe movies did so well, the MCU, is because, you're asking, we're not even talking comic book readers, just your average American movie-going public to buy a Norse god and, a villain who's going to destroy half the universe with the snap of the fingers and all. But by giving the characters some humanity and some identifiable characteristics, it all makes, perfect sense. And so I mean, I always think that's the key. And sometimes it's tougher. Like I wrote Amazon Attacks with Wonder Woman and the
Mhm.
Amazons, and I confess sometimes in that book it was hard to kind of find the human element to kind of tie it all together, kind of bring the reader in. So it's tricky. With Catwoman, it was pretty easy because she's sort of more fun to write than Batman because you can do more with her, and she's kind of, at least as I wrote her, she kind of has like a sort of a skeptical, not quite sardonic, but look at the world around her, like look at this crazy world I live in, and
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
just have to get through it. So it
And
was it was fun.
her code's a little
Yes,
more flexible.
it is. It's a lot more flexible. But I always think I don't think she's a pure villain. She's a
Yeah.
good person and she's a good character. And speaking of reality, the and this was pure coincidence, but when we wrote the plot when the 1 year later where she was pregnant and had a baby and had to deal with that for a little while, it
Hmm.
was coincidentally the virtually the exact time I was writing those was when my wife and I had just adopted a baby from China. So
Oh
I
wow.
knew, like, if you're holding a baby and somebody attacks you, you better fall so you land and don't land, like you can't leave, a weapon laying on the floor if there's a baby in the room. And so
Hmm.
I'd
Hmm.
like to think I brought a little bit of, I had Batman put a baby seat in the car seat. It seemed like something Batman would do. He would be prepared if he had to
Absolutely.
transport a baby to have a car seat in there.
Totally. Totally. If not in the utility belt, at least in the car.
Exactly. Yes, some sort of restraint device in the utility belt with a pacifier, and
That's right. That's right.
he's always prepared, that Batman.
He really is. He really is. A shark repellent. At least we've got
Exactly.
something
Bat
for a
shark
baby.
repellent.
That's right. That's right. So I mentioned some of the titles, and we've talked about a few of them, but curious about uh, maybe some of the most positive experiences that bubble up from any place in the career that you've had, as well as people that have been especially positive and kind of warm collaborations along the way as well.
Well, I mean, like I said, I got to start with Jill because she was, we were friends before we were collaborators, but with she kind of brought me in, and she was the first artist I worked with, and also Joan Hilty, who was our editor on that book, who was at Vertigo at the time. She was great, and it's when you're first turning in a script, it's terrifying. I mean, you're
Mm-hmm.
like, is this right? Is this? And she was great at this is what I always like editors to do, and most of mine have, thankfully. It's if something's not working, they don't say, well, let's do this, this, and this. They say, here's what's not working. Solve it.
Mm-hmm.
You figure it out. Thus, you get to be more part of the story, and you get to, it's still your story you're telling, but you're not always perfect. So I worked in newspapers for decades. So I was used to being edited.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, if somebody told me fix it, I'm like, fine. I didn't, I'm like, oh, don't touch my golden prose. It's not for human consumption, anything like
Right.
that. But those two are good. I mean, I've been lucky to work with some great artists, Pete Woods and David Lopez on Catwoman, and Pat
Mm-hmm.
Gleason on Aquaman, and, Hero. I worked with Kano and Pat Gleason, and um, Leonard Kirk, and tons of people. I'm sure I feel bad forgetting them, but I've been so lucky to have great artists to work with. When I did that 3-part Batman, Chris Weston was the
Mm-hmm.
artist, and I was blown away by what he did. He was the nicest guy. He called me up from England, and you just wanted, because you wanted to talk and get to know me for like an hour. And this is
Oh wow.
pre cell phone, so I don't know how much that cost him, but bless his heart, he was great. So yeah, I've
That's
had so
cool.
much fun working with those artists. That's, to me, that's my favorite part, is after I've turned in the script and then you get your first glimpse of the art. Because
Mm-hmm.
it's always been the case where they've taken what I've given them and it's been brought up a notch or two or 10 or something. It's just stuff that, because they're visual, they know how to make it work better than I do. And so, it's just so much better. Although I
Yeah.
will say, because when I did my mini comics, I wrote and drew them. I I'm still when I do a script before I do it, I do thumbnails of all the pages and then I write
Uh,
the script based on those. I never show the artists the thumbnails because I'm sure they don't want to see them. But at least I know not to make the mistakes of like having a character like, Superman flies in the window and walks across the floor in one panel because it's like you can't have two actions in a single panel. It can't,
that's right.
So
That's right.
it's yeah, I've always yeah, it's so much fun, being part of the collaboration and seeing what the other person brings to it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and, I've had a couple of people come on and mention that idea of getting the art back and kind of seeing the vision in your head. And then you were talking about the editing role of saying, here's what's wrong, and these are things to work on. I would imagine that would be so freeing as an editor to be able to do that, as opposed to feeling like you had to come up with the story yourself.
Right. And I mean, I will say this in especially in comics like DC Comics and some of the Marvel stuff I've done, especially things like Amazon Attacks. I mean, those are largely plotted, at least for broad strokes, at an editorial level. We've
Hmm.
before
Hmm.
that happened, that's the only big sort of epic series, event series, I guess they call it, that I really worked on the central part of. Excuse me. But I sat in a room with who was it? Matt Idelson, Eddie Berganza, and I can't remember who else, a few other people. And we kind of batted out the whole plot
Hmm.
there. And then
Hmm.
I took that and wrote the series based on it. So for the big stuff, I mean, and if you don't want to do that, don't go into corporate comics because these are not just
Yeah,
the story. These aren't the stories you're telling. These are valuable properties that they justifiably want to sell and keep marketing. And so
yeah,
you have to learn to color within the lines, but sometimes that can be kind of fun. It's to have some limitations put on it, seeing what you can do within those limitations.
yeah, yeah. A different kind of challenge, and you're part of the brand at that point. I
Oh,
mean,
completely. Oh,
yeah.
yeah, completely. That's why I liked writing Catwoman more than Batman because I mean, I've written a few Batman stories here and there, but I can't
Mm.
imagine writing the monthly book. I mean, you have everybody looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, yeah.
They always said that's why Frank Miller was made such an impact on Daredevil because nobody cared about Daredevil. If he had taken over Fantastic Four Spider-Man, he
Hmm.
might have never been able to stretch his muscles.
Yeah, true enough, true enough. Well, I think I have one more official question on the list. It's
Okay.
a two-parter, and then we
Oh.
can hit anything we might have missed. I always ask about what you're currently working on creatively, uh, that you can talk about, of
Mhm.
course. And then I always ask about spaces where people can connect with you and see what's happening and get in touch, follow along, that sort of thing.
Okay, right now the latest thing I've done was a story of Bloodshot in the I'm going to pronounce it wrong it's Valentine's Day special, I believe it's called. It's from Valiant, and it's
Hmm. Hmm.
it's kind of nice. It's a little romance anthology, and it's the first time I've been worked with the editor Lisa Hawkins for we worked on X-Men stories literally like 20 years ago, like in X-Men Unlimited. And in
Nice.
fact, when we were catching up, she's like, "What have you been up to since?" I said, "Well, I adopted a kid, and the kid has now grown to adulthood, and that's what I've been up to." But it was great. We got to work together again. It was a lot of fun writing, just kind of a little short story, but it's just a cute little tale, and give it a little romance. I haven't written a lot of romance in my time, so
Mm.
that's the most recent thing. And I don't have anything else coming up directly. I'm hoping maybe something will spring from this, but I haven't heard anything definite yet.
Nice, nice.
Um,
Well, glad to hear that you're crafting in the world of Valiant and bringing
mhm.
romance to Valiant and
Yes, a little
Bloodshot as
romance,
well. Yeah,
exactly. It
yeah.
is. It's kind of sweet. It may be the least violent Bloodshot story ever written.
Well, Pat Benatar, Love is a Battlefield. I mean,
It is a battlefield. You're right.
so yeah. And so the other part of that was spaces where people can connect, follow along, get in touch, and all of those kind of things.
I'm still on Facebook because, I'm an old man, but yeah, you can find me on Facebook easily enough. And I'm on Twitter or X or whatever it's called. I'm on Blue Sky. I have a website, which is sort of a catch-all website. I use it as a portfolio for graphic design because I do a lot of graphic design and for non-comic writing. It's called Pfeifferland, my name and
Hmm.
then land. And there's also sort of covers in some cases of every everything I've done, I've tried to find some covers for and some behind the scenes comments. In fact, if you go there, with finals, we have the original opening page that we had to change after
Oh, nice.
Columbine. We had to
Oh,
do a quick
wow.
rewrite on that. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, if you want to see that, it's kind of interesting. Jill did a bang up job on it. But yeah, Pfeifferland.com, Facebook, Blue Sky, Twitter, and I'm on Threads, but I don't think I've posted anything. But I'm there if you want to, reach out.
All
Oh,
the
and I
things.
also one quick thing, so nothing to do with comics. I
Hmm.
do a weekly radio show where I play
Nice.
music and stuff from through the Rock in the Suburbs radio network, which is a bunch of people doing these. So if you go to my Facebook page, you'll find links to it and everything.
Wonderful, wonderful. You might be the first person. You might be the first person that does a radio show that I've talked with. So awesome.
I
Awesome.
have so much fun with it. I've been doing it for a couple years and it's like gotten me back into music in a way I haven't been since I was maybe in college. I mean, it's just so much fun.
Nice. Well, those were my official questions, but anything that we've missed before we close out?
Um, I don't. Well, I can't. I'll tell you one quick thing if you want to hear, because you mentioned Blood
Yes.
of the Demon, which a lot of people
Uh-huh.
don't
Uh-huh.
don't talk about. And I as someone who grew up reading Burns' X-Men and then his Fantastic Four, this of course blew my mind that I was working with him on that.
Oh
And
yeah,
it
yeah.
was the one person when I told my mom who I was working on, she recognized from my childhood. Like, oh, you used to read his books. I did, and I said I did. And when I got the gig, I was on a phone call with John, and I said to him, I said, it's just standard, looking forward to working with da da da. And I just said something like, I hope because what I did was he would write the plots and I would get Xeroxes and then I dialogued it.
Hmm.
So it was his story. I just wrote the dialogue for because for some reason they felt I had a thing for the dialogue, which it was great fun to do, and I got to see all that burnt pencil art before it was inked, so it was
Oh
great.
yeah, yeah.
But I told him, I said, well, John, I hope you like what I come up with. And he just said, well, if I don't, I'll tell you in 20 years, like I did with Claremont. And I'm like, wow.
What a
But
club to be in,
I know it was
though.
great. And I met, I mean, you hear a lot about John Byrne, but I will say this, I met him at a Mid-Ohio con soon after. I think it was his last convention appearance, and perfect gentleman. He came over to me. It was
Nice.
very exciting to meet him. It was a real pleasure. So that was so much fun. And very few people mention it, so I appreciate you mentioning it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, glad to explore that part of the career and glad to hear that working with someone that was a hero for you turned out well
It did. It really
as
did. It
well.
was so much fun.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Well, as the episode is closing, I don't have the rights to anything or a budget or anything like that, but I'm curious what the outro music would be since you're currently working in the world of music and radio as well.
Probably, I would say something from one of my two favorite bands. Maybe, how about we, because it's a comic book theme, one of my favorite bands in the world is the Ramones.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
they did a cover, a great cover of the old Spider-Man TV show theme song. I think because
Yes, they
both they
did.
and Peter Parker are from Forest Hills, Queens. So I think they have
Fantastic.
that connection. So yeah, so that's so imagine that in your head. And I'm
That's
sure you
right.
can find it on YouTube if you want to listen to it and see what
That's
it
right.
sounds like.
We might link to it. We'll see.
All
Um,
right, excellent.
well, Will, thank you so much for the time and
Thank
the
you.
wonderful conversation. Glad to have you back anytime.
I would be happy to. This was great. Thank you very much.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you.